All right. Agenda item 9, receive, consider, and act upon incorporation planning study matters. And we are going to start with Karen Dempsey.
Okay. As we've been talking about each month, the board initiated a study in 2018, which continued through 2020, and then was put on hold briefly during the COVID pandemic, and then was restarted this year. On August 13th, the board did call an election for incorporation. There will be 2 propositions that appear on the ballot, and the wording for these propositions was developed by legal counsel based on requirements in state law, including our enabling legislation. Proposition A creates a City of the Woodlands and also sets a maximum initial tax rate. The residents can vote for or against this ballot measure. The exact wording is authorizing the Type A city incorporation of the Woodlands Township District and the adoption of an initial property tax rate of not more than 22.31 cents per $100 of valuation of taxable property. Proposition 2 depends on Proposition A passing, and it transfers the township's rights, responsibilities, and authorities to the new City of the Woodlands, dissolving the township. Again, voters can vote for or against this measure, and the wording for Proposition B is upon incorporation of the Woodlands Township District into a Type A general law city to be called the City of the Woodlands, the transfer of the rights, powers, privileges, duties, purposes, functions, responsibilities, the authority to issue bonds, and the authority to impose taxes from the Woodlands Township District to the City of the Woodlands. A couple of key dates that are coming up. October 4th is the last day to register to vote. October 18th is the start of early voting. October 22nd is the last day to apply for a ballot by mail. October 29th is the last day for voting by personal appearance, and November 2nd, of course, is Election Day. A couple of resources for anyone who's interested. For voting eligibility, this is a question that we've gotten a number of times. In order to vote in this election, it is a governmental election, and you are required to be registered to vote in the county of your residence and reside in the boundaries of the Woodlands Township. If you are interested in checking your voter registration or looking for your specific precinct number, that information is available on the county websites. You can look it up by your name. And for Montgomery County, that is www.montgomeryvotes.org, and for Harris County, that is www.harrisvotes.org. Next week, we will be having an educational informational meeting. At the meeting, we will have the consultants who worked on our study, as well as opportunities for members of the public to ask questions of the consultants and on the studies that were performed that are the basis for the incorporation election. For more information, we do have details on the township website. In the November election section, you can find the exact wording of the propositions, as well as candidate names in ballot order for the director positions. And on the Incorporation Study website, of course, we do have access to comprehensive information, including the studies that were the basis, the video and PowerPoint presentation from the August 13th meeting, and FAQs and more. That concludes my portion.
All right. Thank you, Karen. Any questions for Karen? If none, we will now bring up Monique Sharp.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone who do not know me. My name is Monique Sharp. I am the Assistant General Manager of Finance and Administration, and I have been with this organization and its predecessor, the Community Association of the Woodlands, for 29 years. So basically have spent my career here. Tonight I am going to give a presentation on the incorporation financial model, but it's not really the presentation that was given before several weeks ago on the actual different mechanics of the model, so I'm not going to be going through every component of that. Tonight I am going to be addressing some information that has been presented out in the community, and I'm not going to get into, what I'm not going to do is talk about whose assumption is correct and whose assumption is not. That's not my role. What my role here is to make sure that the not just the community in terms of what you're looking at in terms of an incorporation vote, but for mine it's sort of broader. I have a responsibility to our bondholders, to our auditors, to our bankers, to our credit agencies, to make sure that the information is accurate and transparent. And so really, in short, that's what my goal is tonight. So with that, I'm going to remind everyone that there's different components of the incorporation financial model. One of those is the incorporation revenues and expenses that were developed by the Novak Consulting Group. And I know that they will spend some time next week at the informational meeting that Ms. Dempsey just talked about, going through that in detail. The second part of it is the 2022 base budget and 5-year plan. That's prepared by Township staff, by my department, and then it was reviewed and adopted by the Township board, and that's largely what I'm going to spend my evening talking about tonight. Those two things combined equal, when we say the incorporation model, those two components make up the incorporation model. Okay, starting off, I want to remind everybody what the different components are in terms of numbers. So when we talk about the incorporation model in terms of revenues, and I'm talking about fiscal year 2025 because that is the fourth year of incorporation. So say if the voters chose to incorporate approved incorporation in November, we're looking out 4 years until all of the costs are fully loaded in. Basically, it's a transition of law enforcement costs. So that's why we focus on what you're going to see as year 4 or year 2025. So the base budget will remain regardless of whether or not we incorporate. So that base budget represents about 93.7% of what we're talking about in total. So when we talk about the incorporation model, the overwhelming majority of it is just exactly what we're doing today, the services that we're providing today. There's no change in that. And then there's about 6% that's related to incorporation revenues that are unique to incorporation, and we'll talk about those a little bit more later on. In terms of incorporation expenses, it's basically the same thing. The base budget represents 89.1% of total expenses. Again, none of that changes whether we incorporate or not. The difference is the $16 million represents about 10% of what we call the incorporation expenses. Those are primarily law enforcement and public works, and again, we'll talk about those a little bit more. What I want to start off with is talking about first of all, let's talk about the expenses and how they're funded. So we have projected expenses in 2025 just related to incorporation. So this doesn't include the base budget. This is just incorporation of $16 million. And the way that is being funded in the model is two components. One of it, we have $9.7 million in new revenues. Those were on that slide that you just saw where we showed the 6%. That's what that is. And then we also have what we call net revenue capacity in the base budget when we look out to year 2025. So when I say net revenue capacity, anytime obviously that you're projecting out, you are making a set of assumptions in what's going to happen. So in our base budget model, there are literally tens of thousands of transactions that go into the budget that we then carry out with certain assumptions out into the 5-year plan. And these are just a very small piece of the different components that we look at when we're building our forecasting and our budgeting. So I want to talk about forecasting a little bit because there's been a lot of conversation around the types of assumptions and forecasting that we do. So for the township, we get guidance on our financial forecasting guidelines from the 3 organizations that you see there primarily. The Government Finance Officers Association, there's over 1,900 members in the United States of local and state governments. The National Advisory Council on State and Local Budgeting, and then the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, or GASB. What we do, when you read all of the material, which obviously we're not going to go through all of that tonight, but it talks about, what it does is it breaks it down between developing an objective forecast and a conservative forecast. Objective forecast is more realistic. Conservative forecast, you want to be sure you're not overstating revenues or understating expenses so that you can have a sustainable budget that will go into the future. We always try to get somewhere in between there and lean towards the conservative side. So how often does the township update its financial assumptions? Sales tax growth is, and really all of our assumptions, but right now we'll talk about sales tax, are reviewed annually during the budget process, and then they're revised based on an analysis of many economic factors. So what I'm showing here is an example of where we've been over the past 5 years. In 2018, which is when we were first looking at the first incorporation study for this process, we only had a growth rate in there of 1% because we were coming off, I don't know if you remember in 2017, oil and gas crisis, there was a lot of things going on, the economy was not doing great, and so we went very conservative that year and went with the 1% growth. Actual growth was 2.6 that year. So in 2019, we increased our projection to 2%. And then what happened? The Occidental acquisition of Anadarko. Well, Anadarko was our 3rd largest sales taxpayer. And so we knew, based on the revenue that they generated from there, that we would probably have an impact. So we lowered it back to 1%. And that 1% in 2020 is what was used in the incorporation model at that time. But then we had an anticipated rebound from the pandemic is how we budgeted for 2021. So we knew 2020 was terrible. We figured we would have a comeback in 2021, which I'll show you in a minute. We're having a great comeback. And then what did we do for 2022? We were looking at our current trends, particularly our internet sales, and that's how we came up with a 2.75% growth assumption for sales tax.
Monique, I'll just stop you for a second.
Sure.
Now, the changes in the law that provide internet sales taxes did not occur before we did the initial projections.
That is correct. Now,
So
thank you very
just
much.
wanna make a clarification.
Right. Not only the Supreme Court decision was after that, but then it took the state comptroller's office almost a year and a half to make the rules. So we really did not start receiving sales tax from internet sales until the 4th quarter of 2019. That's correct. Here is a look back at our sales and use tax growth over a period of time. So you can see when we start off this chart back in 2012 through 2015, we were having major growth. And the reason for that is, if you'll recall, the development of the Woodlands during that time, we had the town center was booming, the development of Howard Hughes was going on, the village of Creekside Park. So there was just lots and lots of activity, and it was throwing off a lot of sales tax. More recently, when we look back at 2017 through 2019, when we average those years, it's about 3.8%. The 2017 is a little bit higher than normal because, as you can see, in 2016, that was the year we were talking about earlier where there was an economic decline, and then usually after a year like that, we bounce back pretty good. In 2020, with COVID, we had a 13.1% drop in sales tax revenue, and in 2021, we are bouncing back very nicely, projecting a 15.6%. Here's our latest sales tax report. So as you can see, we're 14.7% over where we were last year at this time, and we are running 5.7% or $2.2 million ahead of budget. As we were talking about a minute ago, from the sales tax from internet transactions, starting in 2019, and then this year we're forecasting an 18.2% increase. The other thing that we do when we're developing assumptions and financial forecast is look at our tax revenues by business sector. A lot of people, when they think sales tax, they just think of the retail tax, what you're used to paying at the department stores and things like that. But we actually have about 22 different categories of sales tax. I haven't listed them all here. I've listed everything down to 1% of a category that would make up at least 1% or greater of our sales tax revenues. You can see at the top there that retail trade by far is our greatest contributor of sales tax. And we are currently trending about 29.6% when you compare to the previous year. Food services was still trending negative during the first 4 months of this year, but has really picked up recently, so that's great. We like to see that. Information and manufacturing is still down when you compare to last year, but it's trending up. If you look at the past quarter, we're doing good. And I'm not going to read all the rest of those, but you can see very positive trends in our sales tax categories. I'm showing this because it's always good to get an independent view of what our projections might be for the sales tax, so we look for different ones. In this case, this is Novak Consulting, who's been working on our incorporation process, as you know, and their probable growth projection there for property tax is 2% on an ongoing basis, and then for sales tax, it's 3%. So, a lot of questions about why the township decided to use and by the township I mean me, use a 2.75% growth assumption in the 5-year plan instead of a 1%. And I say instead of a 1% because that is, there's a lot of conversation about how the growth assumption that the board chose to use in the budget is higher than the 1% that was put into the original incorporation model. But this is why. It's all the things we just talked about. We have historical trends showing 3.8%. We have a Texas comptroller, which I didn't mention that, but that's the other group that we look to. They do a very detailed by region in Texas look at economic growth and what their projections for sales tax are. So we always look at that report, and you can see that there. Our peer cities, Sugar Land and Round Rock, are using 3% in their 5-year plan. So if you go out and look at their budgets that have just been published, they are using 3%. Just mentioned Novak Consulting. So when you look at all those together, that is why I recommended and the board chose the 2.75% growth factor. One of the comments that I want to clarify that we've heard a lot is that the incorporation model is almost tripling sales tax revenue projections, and that is not the case. So based on the assumptions that we just talked about, what is happening with our sales tax growth is we're about $1.6 million a year annual sales tax growth in the 5-year plan based on what we just talked about.
So Monique, just to put a point on it, go back to that slide if you would. So if it was really triple, we'd be looking at, instead of 60 million in sales tax in 2023, people are saying we'd be getting 180 million.
Right.
No one ever said that at all. You're saying it's only about $1.7 million,
Right.
$1.6 million increase every year.
Right.
The public criticism out there from many who are giving speeches regarding incorporation is that we manipulated our growth in order to achieve an outcome, and that's just not factual. The fact is, we showed you all the trend lines and what they are, and our actual current trend line is higher than the adopted change to our 5-year plan. And the language they're using, because language matters and it gets people incented, is they doubled the assumptions here and they tripled the assumptions there. Well, you know, they're giving no context to the public. They're intentionally misleading people, trying to scare them into there's some, you know, nefarious activity occurring here, and it's just not the case.
So, if I may, Chairman, Monique, Ms. Sharp, has anybody from those entities that are having those conversations in the community, have they approached you or talked to you personally to try and understand this better?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay, so besides the sales tax growth, one of our other large sources of revenue is property tax. And so why did the township use a property revaluation rate of 2%, again, instead of 1%? 1% is what we had used in the prior incorporation study, because at that time, we were trending at 1%. So again, to be conservative, that is what we used. Now that has changed. So we looked at several different things. Again, the Novak Consulting probable growth projection was 2%. We have been trending upward over the past several years. I think we all know what real estate is doing right now, has been doing. All of those transactions that have been happening this year will get factored into the January 1st, 2022 property tax rolls, and that is what we will use for projections in the following year. So we know that's coming. I've seen reports out there anywhere from 5.8 to 12.3% increases in home values. Some are much higher than that, but I sort of threw out the high ones and just went with an average. And then on multiple websites, there are projections for the next 2 years in terms of growth of values in the township area of ranging between 2.87 and 3.2. So based on all of that, we went with a revaluation of 2%. And by revaluation, just to make sure people understand, it's taking your current, when we mean by revaluation is your home value, how it increases each year. So different people call it different things, but that's what we're referring to. So what is the difference between a 1% and 2% revaluation on an average value home of $459,000 in the Woodlands? We're talking about $10 in difference. So when we talk about we're doubling the revaluation on a home, what we're talking about on an individual taxpayer basis on an average value home is $10.
And
Annually, right?
Annually, yes. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think Commissioner Novak, who is our, I guess, external financial consultant, used this narrative as, well, that's going to accumulate to a 10% tax increase over 5 years and some astronomical number. It's $10 a year. And here's the other thing we're not even talking about is if we achieve greater than projected sales tax revenues, greater than projected reappraisals, the tax rate would be adjusted downward to offset some of those increases.
Right.
So, the budget and the projections for incorporation is a 5-year plan. And that flat tax rate of 0.2231, which is on the ballot, is using these very conservative assumptions in order to make sure there's enough funding there in the outer years where we're fully loaded with the new expenses. So if we achieve greater, because I talk to realtors and they're telling me 15 to 20% increases just in the last 12 months here, that doesn't mean we have to keep the same rate. We would adjust downward because we have more revenue than we need at that point.
Right, and we'll show in a slide here in a little bit that shows the township has a history.
But the
of
$10
doing it.
is relative because the message is, I think it was massive tax increases, big taxes. You're going to be taxed out of your house, and this one assumption change was $10 a year.
Yes, sir. So with that assumption, what are the projected property tax revenues for the township? $1.2 million a year, and that's not all due to revaluation. We have new properties that are added to the roll each year. We have expiring tax abatements. We have 3 of those, I believe, in the next couple of years. And so when those abatements expire, then that generates additional tax revenue. And then, of course, the 2% revaluation. Okay, so where all of that led us, again, I wanted to talk about the assumptions and what we used in order to develop the 5-year plan of the base budget. We're not even talking about incorporation revenues or expenses at this point. This was just our ongoing township expenses. But when we put all of that together into the model, into the incorporation model and projected that out, what we found is that we could maintain the current tax rate of 22.31 cents and have that as the maximum initial tax rate in 2022, should the voters choose to vote for incorporation, as we just talked about on the ballot. The rate is 22.31 cents. So again, I know there's been conversations about that's not the real number. The real number's the old model of 28.6 or whatever it was, but it's not. It's this. It's 22.31 cents is the language on the ballot, and that is what the board has approved. That rate is carried out for 5 years. So the incorporation tax rate that is projected for 2025, which is based on everything we just looked at, that tax rate does not change. We have the financial capacity in terms of the assumptions, the debt service, the expenses, the capital, the reserve allocations. When you put all of that together, there is the financial capacity to keep that rate at 22.31. So the maximum initial tax rate, that's the rate in 2022. So if the voters approve this year for incorporation, the rate can be next November, when the board sets the tax rate, or the new city council sets the tax rate next year, is 22.31 by law. So there's no getting around it. It's by law. It can be lower than 22.31, but it cannot be higher than 22.31. Thereafter, the first year, you are subject to the new city, the township. All local jurisdictions almost in Texas are subject to what is called a property tax cap. So effective January 1st, 2020, there were changes to the property tax law that limited growth in revenues generated by existing properties to 3.5% per year. Previous to that, it was 8%. So any rate increase above 3.5%, that 3.5% requires voter approval. Again, that's not something, there's not a loophole in that. There's no way to get around that. That's anything above 3.5% increase. And it's not even an increase in the total rate. We won't get too technical, but it's an increase in the maintenance and operations piece of the rate. For the owner, so what does this mean for the owner of an average value home in the Woodlands? That any tax increase greater than approximately $32 would require voter approval. And I put approximately in there, and you'll see that in several other things, because I don't want anybody to hold that to me next year. It's going to be something around there, but it could be $1, either way, or cents either way, 50 cents, who knows? But again, I can't predict that. It's not like I have a number right now that I can tell you, because it depends on appraised values and all kinds of things. But based on what it is this year, the maximum would have been $32. So how does that property tax cap work? And I'm just going to put a disclaimer here that please note when you see the increases going out from 2025, that these are not the rates that are projected for a new city. This is merely an example of how the 3.5% cap limits grow the property tax rate unless voter approval is obtained. So again, this is not our projection. This is an example. Based on current data, the maximum annual increase without voter approval would be 0.007. So not 7 cents, not 7/10 of a cent, it's 0.007, which again is the $32 on an average value home. What that means is it would take approximately 10 years to raise the tax rate 6.3 cents to get to 28.61. So again, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about how the cap works and how much your tax rate can increase from that initial maximum vote that is taken. It would take 10 years to be able to move the needle 6 cents.
And I think it's important to point out that our financial model does not project an increase.
No, exactly.
This is a worst-case scenario, city council gone wild, going to the maximum without voter approval every year for 10 straight years. I don't think they'll get reelected doing that. But there are actual people that hold themselves out as news people that have published that our tax rate's going to go to 43 cents. It's without voter approval. This is statistically illegal without voter approval.
Right.
It's not going to go up. The numbers that are being used broadly and loosely don't match state law. They also don't match our actual projections, which showed the rate would stay relatively flat. going
Exactly,
forward.
which is why I have the big disclaimer up there. This is merely an example. This is not what we're projecting at all. I just want to show how the property cap
And
works.
Monique, I mean, I think it's really important to remind everybody that, what percentage of our actual budget is made up of property taxes?
That's actually coming, thank you.
Don't tell, no, hold on a second. Full disclosure, I did not see this slideshow before she.
No, you did not.
No, so, okay, thank you.
Before we get to that slide, though, it is coming up. So we were talking about this in the property tax cap. This would be the worst case scenario, definitely, again, not what we're projecting, except for seniors. One of the options that has been built into the incorporation model is enacting a property tax freeze for persons 65 or older or disabled. So I've gotten a lot of questions about how does that work.
And, Monique, and I think you need to say that that's already baked into the 5-year forecast that, that we're showing.
Thank you. Yes, it is. It is part of the incorporation model. We have reduced property tax revenues to account for this tax freeze because it's the intent, it was included into the model, and so we wanted to be accurate about that. So how does it work? In the year that you qualify, which is when you turn 65 years old or you qualify for a disability, your tax rate is frozen, not your tax rate, your actual tax levy is frozen that year. So in this example, on an average value of a $459,000 home, if the tax rate is 22.31 cents, your tax levy would be $1,024, and that is the most you are ever going to pay again in your life unless you make major improvements to your home. So if you do add a big room addition or a pool or something like that, that value will be captured, but other than that, it's not. And so in the following year, say the tax rate increases or you have a revaluation and that tax would go up, you're not going to pay that increase in tax. It's going to be capped. You do, however, if your value goes down or the tax rate decreases, you do get the benefit of having your tax lowered. So this is only a ceiling. It doesn't mean your tax can go lower.
So let me pick up on this.
Sure.
You may have heard, we shouldn't be telling you this. We shouldn't be promising a tax freeze to seniors, and we're somehow immoral and incapable of providing this benefit to our residents. So we checked. The interim city council, which would be this current board, does have the authority to implement this tax freeze post the election. It's not, and this entire board committed to doing so, which is why we reduced the revenues in our 5-year projections, because we felt our seniors deserved and our disabled deserved tax rate certainty for at least our level of the property tax.
Right.
So it can be implemented, doesn't require waiting for the next city council to be elected.
And Ms. Sharp, can you explain also how this freeze on taxes, on property taxes, would differ from what some are saying is a better option, which is a homestead exemption, a better option for talking points, but not in reality?
Yeah. It's sort of covered on the third bullet there, which is unlike a homestead exemption, a tax freeze is not impacted by future increases in home value, unless, as we talked about, it makes improvements, or the tax rate, and cannot be rescinded once enacted, and therefore provides the ultimate certainty about your future tax bills. So homestead exemptions are subject to future tax rate increases, or tax rates, and future changes in the value of your home. Okay, another question that I have been getting and that I wanted to try to bring some clarity to is, how can the property tax rate stay the same if expenses are increasing due to incorporation? Well, first, I'd like to say that that has always been the history here, and it's not unique to the township. There's other local jurisdictions that have the same type of have had the same type of pattern. So expenses naturally go up every year because of economic conditions and a whole variety of reasons that we won't talk about here. But here's a look at the township's history, and as you can see, increases have been managed. Increases in expenses have been managed, but they have gone up, and during that time, the tax rate has decreased. And then what we're calling for right now in the 5-year plan is for that tax rate to maintain at the same level, which is what we do in all of our 5-year plans. Every 5-year plan we always ever produce, we just keep the tax rate the same so that you can have an apples-to-apples comparison, and then every year during the budget process, the board makes the determination for the following year. So that's one piece of it. Historically, that's what we've always done. It's not like a new concept. Secondly, and this gets to Director Reeser's a question a little while ago, property tax revenues, I think a lot of people, when they think of taxes, they only think of the property tax revenue as the source to fund all of our expenses. For the township, it's only 36% of our tax revenue sources. 64% are made up of other revenues. The primary one in that is our sales tax. So sales tax, between sales tax and hotel tax, that makes up almost 50% of our budget. So we're not reliant only on property tax to fund any increases in expenses. We would hope that we have a great economic base here, which we have and support, and that we would be able to generate that sales tax from there. But in addition to the other revenues, this is a slide that I've shown many, many times before. There are many components to a balanced budget and to a sustainable budget. And so not only when we look out into the 5-year plan and look at how our finances are, do we just look at revenues, we also have services and amenities. And the board has been, if you look at our expenses per capita, it's really very flat over a long period of time, so there's actively managing growth in expenses. Our reserves and fund balances, because of the policies set in place by the board and the careful management of expenses and conservative budget principles that are used, we have sufficiently have money sufficient in our reserves that we were able this year in the budget process to lower the annual allocations to them by $1.5 million. So that is also playing into all of this. The board has also been very active in refinancing debt or paying debt off, and that has led to lower debt service payments over time, and we're going to see a separate chart on that. I want to talk about the other revenues now, though, in terms of specifically the incorporation revenues. So there, as we talked about a little while ago, there are about 6% of the new revenues coming into the budget have to do with something specific to incorporation. So I'm going to start off with the mixed beverage tax. These are not new taxes. Been getting that question a lot. These are not new taxes. These taxes are currently being paid, but the state keeps the revenue because as a township, as a special purpose district, we are not eligible to receive those revenues. If incorporated, the city of the Woodlands would receive the tax revenue instead. So that tax revenue is made up of a mixed beverage gross receipts tax. That's paid by the permit holder, so that's not even paid by residents. And then a mixed beverage sales tax. In total, we have about $1 million revenue estimate for that tax revenue. We are also projecting about $877,000 in revenues from fine forfeitures and fees. This is not a general tax that all taxpayers are going to pay. Only taxpayers who are subject to municipal court fines, forfeitures, or fees will pay those. So this is a very specific, as is this. Building permit fees, it's not something that everybody pays, only by those taxpayers requiring building permit review services.
Monique, if I may, just one moment. Those are fees that are being paid to other governmental entities in Montgomery and Harris County currently. They're
Yes,
just
sir.
not being paid to the township.
Thank you. That's a good point. Yes. Okay. So with that, I just wanted to go over all of those to talk about our base budget, how we got there, how that's being used in terms of our incorporation projections and how that was loaded into the model. The next thing I want to talk about is some information that is in regards to our either base budget or the incorporation model, where it has been projected that we have underfunded our expenses or our reserves. And again, in the interest of having accurate information and for the board to understand, not just the board, but the board and everybody, the public, again, our bondholders, our auditors, all of those people that rely on our financial information, in order for them to have that confidence, I wanted to be able to go through this. So what you're seeing here is a page out of a report that was prepared by RCREF Consulting Services. This firm was commissioned by Howard Hughes Corporation in order to take a look at our incorporation model and to report their findings. The findings of that report, of that consultant, are listed here. And what he found was in total a $26.8 million understatement of funds needed for incorporation. So I'd like to go through each one of these separately, starting actually at the bottom. $2.5 million understatement of asphalt street rehabilitation budget. It was $500,000 annual for 5 years, so that's where he came up with the 2.5. So this is from the Novak Consulting Group's Incorporation Study Consolidated Report. And this talks about, this is the action that the board took. I don't have the minutes. I could get the minutes too, but what the board included in the incorporation study is $1.25 million in annual infrastructure costs related to pavement management, including asphalt and concrete. Based on the H.R. Green study, so H.R. Green is an engineering firm that was contracted to look at our pavement management. This amount, the $1,250,000 annually, is sufficient to maintain all paved roadways in the Woodlands at excellent condition. What the H.R. Green report recommended is $1.25 million for 5 years, and then it could stop, because that would be what would be able to get the roads to excellent condition. What the board decided to include in the incorporation model was to continue that $1.25 million into the future, so that there would be a funding source of money, not just this one time to get the roads to that condition, but for ongoing maintenance. And so that is what is included in our budget.
Yeah, if I remember the conversation correctly, they actually gave us 3 different numbers. And the $1.25 million is actually the highest of the three numbers that they suggested to us.
That is correct, yes, sir.
Well, it's actually sitting on top of about $5 million in other roadway maintenance budgeted. So this is just addressing the $2.5 million over 5 years that they're trying to point out in their
Right.
analysis, and our number is actually higher.
It is. So in the incorporation model and the presentations, information on the website, you can see the full budget, but you're right, I was just addressing this one piece of it. So that's why I have the X there, because that is factually incorrect. The next one I want to talk about is the $10.7 million overdraft of the Incorporation Reserve that the consultant claimed. So here is our Incorporation Reserve. The balance at the beginning of 2022 was $20.8 million. In the incorporation study, as we went out into the 5-year plan, we had this different type of activity. We were adding revenues, which you can see outlined there in the orange, and the consultant did not include any of that $12.2 million of funding sources in his analysis. And that is why down at the very bottom, you can see where his report says that we are $10.7 million overdrafted in our incorporation reserve. In reality, even after setting aside potentially $16 million to provide funding assistance for a possible municipal court police station under incorporation, we would still have $1.5 million. So again, we are not overdrafted in our incorporation reserve at all.
So they're $12.2 million wrong.
Yes, sir, in terms of the math, yes. So the next one I want to talk about are the understatement of expenses for law enforcement operations and law enforcement capital. So per the RCREF consultant's report, the reason that he feels like that those were understated is because of you can see in sentence A, this is inconsistent with the definite expectation that the new city will have a full-service police force. And the full service, the difference between full service and the hybrid transition model that the board voted on is $4.7 million, so that's where he's getting his number. The consultant then goes on to state that evidence of this expectation of a full-service model is based on the following. There's a statement that was written by staff in the August 2021 Community Magazine. There was a statement made by a board member during a February 2020 meeting, and that the hybrid model was only an option. So then his conclusion is written down there below, that this, meaning those, the A, B, and C, leaves no doubt that the full-service model should be used in the financial models for incorporation, and because of this inconsistency, there's a significant understatement of law enforcement expenses in the financial model. So, obviously, although I recalled, I went back to the minutes, but the best source to determine the intent of the Board of Directors is not a statement in a community magazine or even by a board member. It is the minutes, the official minutes of the meeting, and it is clear in the minutes that the board chose to include the transition, the hybrid transition model into the incorporation model. And so those numbers that you see there down below are what is included in the budget, in the incorporation model for law enforcement cost. So in that regard, we also feel that the ones with the X's by them are the ones that obviously are just factually incorrect in terms of what the board decided or what is actually included in the incorporation model. I'm not going to address the public works and the franchise fees. If you read his report, it's based on a completely different set of assumptions than what our consultant and sub-consultants are, what their assumptions were and what they recommended. So that's the difference.
Chairman Bunch?
Please.
So, Monique, to your knowledge, did this RCREF contact either you and/or Novak or Green to discuss the public works assumptions that were in our model?
Not to my knowledge, no, sir. So just want to remind the board and anyone and the public what is included for public works in our incorporation model. Right now in our base budget, we have about 5.5 growing out to almost $6 million in the 5-year plan. And then what you see there in green are the adds, the additional expenses that have been added specifically related to incorporation.
Now, I'm going to stop on this slide because I was reading my newspaper that I didn't ask to get mailed to me, but it does provide a good visual. So in this, soon to be in your mailbox if you haven't already read it, it is articulating that our proposed public works budget is $6.3 million. And what is our actual?
12.2.
12.2, which when they show Conroe is at 11.7. So there's an effort to show a vast disparity in planning and funding towards public works, and our actual per budget is higher.
And I also want to point out, the city of Conroe is significantly larger in terms of landmass than the Woodlands Township.
Yeah,
So
they're actually 72.8 square miles.
Yes.
And we're right around 47.8.
Right, so they're double the size, and so we're actually budgeting more for our road, our capital, our public works budget than the city of Conroe. That doesn't make any sense, so.
It makes sense because
It makes sense
we
to
have,
us, so,
Well,
but
we
no.
have concrete streets, and a lot of the rest of the county is asphalt, and it's less expensive to put in and less expensive to maintain.
Which means that our annual, repair and replacement budget should be significantly less.
Yes,
So.
because concrete lasts a lot longer.
Exactly.
it's also, we do more advanced streetscape maintenance,
Right.
so,
Which
which our
we-
community wants, which
which
we
we pay
budgeted
for.
to continue to do, correct.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was the RCREF consultant's report. Now I want to talk about the law enforcement critique, and that's the word that they use. It's not my word, but that's what it was called, the law enforcement critique. This report was also commissioned by the Howard Hughes Corporation. So there's 3 different pieces to this that I want to talk about. One of them is circled there in green, where it's talking about that the incorporation model does not include, basically for the cost, or for most of the cost of patrol vehicle replacements. So we're going to go over that. Talks about the numbers you see circled in red, the $11.1 million, that those were what was included for our current, that's the number that was included for our current 92 patrol deputies that we fund. The report says that we did not include a 5% increase across the board salary in our incorporation model, and that we kept the numbers flat, which is what you can see there showing in red there, because we do not have a 2% CPI growth factor built into our budget. And based on all of that, their conclusion that they reached is that that the incorporation model is underfunded by $7.2 million. So first I want to, I guess I should say, when I first started reading this, I was really confused because I knew the numbers were not what were there, and I couldn't figure out how there was such a disconnect. But then when I went back and started reading the whole report, I figured it out, which is basically what I'm showing down there. So when you look, this is from their report, one of the first pages, and they talk about the different documents and videos that they looked at in their analysis. And as you can see, it ended in May 15th of 2020. So they have not looked at any of our updated models or financial analysis since 2020.
And that's an important date because we do our budgets in August of 2020, and we just finished ours in August of 2021.
Right,
So everything they're using is 2 years old.
correct,
Actually 3 budgets ago.
right,
And it's in the middle of a pandemic,
right.
which is probably one of the worst events most of us have seen nationwide, worldwide in our lifetimes.
Yes. So this is a page from the township's adopted 2022 budget. So one of the first things that you can see there is we do include in our budget, in the operations part, expensed vehicles and equipment totaling $1.2 million a year. There's other sources, and we're going to talk about that, of funds to fund vehicles, but this is in our base budget right now. In terms of the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office, the contract that we have with the 92 deputies and the overtime, I'm pointing this out because we actually did grow it in the budget this year by 9.2%. So there's a big disconnect there about how we didn't grow expenses at all, how we should have grown them by 5%. What we actually did is we grew them by 9.2%. Part of that was the 5% because they did have a 5% across the board salary increase. The other thing that we had to fund was increase in their health insurance. You may have read some of the reports over their health insurance for Montgomery County. Their fund was underfunded, and so there's been a adjustment to that to get it back up to standard. And because we pay all salaries and benefits for those contracted deputies, our increase actually ended up being 9.2%. So our total law enforcement budget is not the 11.1 that's in the consultant's report. Right now it's at 13.7 million. Also recall from that first page that one of the criticisms of the incorporation model is that we did not have a 2% annual CPI factor. In fact, we have a 2.25% annual CPI growth factor in our 5-year plan. So this is how our law enforcement budget is growing. The second, So when we put all of that together, what we're talking about, you can see there down at the bottom, that is what our actual law enforcement budget is, growing from 13.7 to 14.4 for a total over 4 years of 56 million. According to the report, the law enforcement report, they said we should have 51.8 million. So obviously we have covered that and then have excess of $4.2 million.
So when they say we've grossly underfunded, here it is, yeah, inaccurate and untrustworthy, grossly unfunded, we actually fund $4 million more than their recently hired experts are telling us we need for this particular item.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you trust who you want to trust.
So here is I said there was 3 different components to the law enforcement report. Here's the second one. So in addition to the 92 contract deputies, in the transition agreement, we will be funding 19 additional ones, which are referred to as the direct law enforcement positions. And in the transition agreement, it states that the city will fund 100% of the personnel cost of those positions beginning with the county fiscal year following incorporation. So those red lines that you see through there, the consultant picked up those costs in the first year, which is inaccurate. So even if the rest of it was true, those numbers where they're saying that our shortfall is $4.8 million, that would be off by that $2.3 million. But it's a moot point because those positions are fully funded in our incorporation model. 100% of those costs for those positions are in our model, so there is no funding shortfall related to those positions. Third,
Just to say it in another way, not only is there no shortfall in funding, but there's no diminishment in community service to the residents. They will not notice any changes in the law enforcement services when they call for help. It'll be there.
that's a good point. That's something the board wanted to make certain of, so that's why all of these expenses are fully loaded into here. Yes, ma'am. The third piece of this is, you'll recall from the first slide, that the law enforcement report said that funding for all law enforcement vehicles were not included in the updated incorporation model. And up there at the top, you can see that they said that the incorporation model was $6.1 million short. So funding for all law enforcement vehicles is, in fact, included in the updated incorporation model. It includes 15 vehicles are funded out of the operating budget, 27 are funded in the Incorporation Reserve. The remaining vehicles are included in the capital fund. And here's sort of a reconciliation of all that. So over the 4 years, we are purchasing 135 vehicles, or at least that's what's forecasted in the incorporation model. There is the cost per vehicle. That's one thing that's different in our report. Their report suggested a $75,000 cost per vehicle, but what we used was the one that was given to us 2 months ago by Montgomery County Sheriff's Office. So
that's important. We just funded 15 vehicles at this cost.
that is correct.
Okay.
That is correct. And license plate readers, but that's not even included in here, but that's correct. So when you look at all that, again, here is how it is scheduled out in our incorporation model to fund a total of $9.8 million in vehicles. So again, their report said we were $6.1 million short. Just to make it clear, we are fully funded on all law enforcement vehicles. Okay, so I'm going to move on from the law enforcement report now and on
Well,
to...
before we go too far, back to Director Milner's question, which was excellent, did anybody from this commissioned study to contact you or anyone on staff or anyone in our consulting group?
Not me, and not to my knowledge, anybody else.
And to be clear, nobody from Howard Hughes has ever called us either.
Not me, no, sir.
And just for clarity, since, the Commissioner of Precinct 3 seems to be the most vocal individual about the inaccuracy of the law enforcement and the infrastructure, has he ever called you to ask you questions about the incorporation study?
No, sir.
Okay. And there's 2 retired law enforcement officers from the city of Houston who have proclaimed publicly how inaccurate your work is in this study, and 2 local law enforcement officers who have now also come out and endorsed Commissioner and these 2 individuals' perspective on the study. Have any of them ever called and talked to you about the study or asked for any information from the township that supports the model?
No, sir.
Okay, I just...
Well, I'll even expand that question. Did any board member get called and asked for clarification on any of the things prior to them publishing a scathing review and printing their own newspaper filled with inaccuracies and really, I won't even say half-truths because we just proved None of it's true.
No, but I'm sure we've been told that we don't understand.
And just to reiterate, everything you just saw is based on our actual current budgets, our actual current funding, actual cash on hand, not speculation of anything, actual current costs. Okay.
And in many cases, it's actually a little bit more conservative than recommendations that were made by the consultants for us to consider, correct?
That is true.
Okay.
As we talked about at the beginning, we always lean on the conservative side.
Thank you.
And
So
Chairman Bunch,
you would have to assume that, if we have exceeded their projections of what we need, then obviously incorporation is very much doable at the tax rate that we've actually proposed. You might want to say it audibly, instead,
You're smiling,
for
but
the
is that a
record,
yes?
but,
I mean, I can't argue with that logic, of course, that's right. No, yes, I mean, we have more funding in there than they're even recommending, so that would, we
Chairman
certainly
Bunch,
feel
if
like
I
it's
also may
sufficient.
add to the law enforcement component, I know Monique has more slides, but I think it's important to point out that we have actually reached out to the Houston-Galveston Area Council this week, spoke directly with the executive director who confirmed that if incorporation were to pass, general law cities would automatically be eligible for at least 3 different public safety grant programs that are not reflected in this model. So there's no federal, there's no state, and there's no HGAC grant programs built into any of these models, which most likely would be available for either a general law or home rule city.
Thank you. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the next topic. So one of the questions that we are getting is, has the growth in taxable property values created a windfall in property tax revenue? And this is one of the charts that you have probably seen, and just recreated it here with numbers that tie exactly to our records. So here is our property tax value that is increasing since 2010, which was the initial year of the township, and going through fiscal year 2021. So the taxable value is $21.1 billion. Here is a history of our tax rate. So you can see here that it has steadily declined over time. So one of the comments, I guess the projections, or one of the statements is, over the last 5 years, there has been a buildup in our reserve accounts because the board has not decreased the tax rate while property tax rates while taxable property values have increased. So values have gone up, and the criticism, I guess, is that the tax rate remained the same, and then the statement is it was done in order to build up reserves, and particularly the Incorporation Reserve. So what I want to point out on this one is, in the earlier years, you can see that there was a rapid increase in taxable values. Since that orange line, those taxable value increase has been much, much smaller than what you're seeing in the previous years. Also, if you remember back to our sales tax growth chart, in the beginning of this slide, at the beginning of these years, there was a lot of sales tax growth. So that was also helping to be able to lower the property tax rate. But what's really important here, and the piece that is not on this slide, is the no new revenue tax rate. So the no new revenue tax rate is the rate that would produce the same amount of property tax revenue as the previous year if applied to the same properties. It's a fancy way of saying that the no new revenue rate is the rate that is calculated by the tax assessor, that if the local entity imposes that rate, the only increase in tax revenue they're going to get is from new properties added to the roll. So it limits the amount of growth in property tax revenue to only new properties. So let's impose the effective, it used to be called effective tax rate, so I'm old school. The no new revenue rate on top, which is shown in black, on top of what the adopted tax rate is for the board. So there was no, again, just want to make clear, what has happened over the past 5 years is the board has each year lowered the tax rate to the revenue rate. The only exception there was in year 2017, and that was because we were coming off of a terrible that was back when all that economic havoc was going on, and so the board felt that it would be best in that year in order to keep it the same, and then you can see in the next year, the effective tax rate actually went back up over what the rate was. So it's very important to always track what the no new revenue rate is when you're talking about tax rates. What all of that means is this is a look at our property tax revenues per capita over this period of time. It's virtually unchanged. So way back in 2013, property tax revenue being generated per taxpayer or per individual was $392. It's now at $393. So again,
And Monique, if you were to apply the annual rate of inflation to those numbers, what would that end number be? Probably a lot closer to 450 or 460, wouldn't it?
it would.
Yep.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
I have a question. Could you please go back to slide 47? So on that slide, there's some claims being made out there by one PAC that's against incorporation that we've accrued close to $20 million that we basically used on one social media post, stole from the residents since we began the incorporation model. Now, when did we begin this incorporation study we're working on currently?
I'm gonna let Karen be my expert.
Well, that was 2018.
It's 2018, yeah,
Yeah,
I just want to make
2018.
sure, yes.
So I just want to make sure when I'm looking at this chart, and if you'd go to the next screen, I'm sorry, the next one, yeah. So is there $20 million anywhere from 2018 to 2021 that we've stolen somehow in this property tax scheme we're running to fund our incorporation model?
There is not, and actually, we're going to see some slides. Actually, the Incorporation Reserve was funded prior to 2017 with a bunch of favorable variances, and I'm going to talk about all
Okay,
that.
thank you.
Okay, so actually what the information is out there is that, again, because the township kept the tax rate flat, which it wasn't flat, it was lowered to the no new revenue rate, that $50 million was generated in reserves. And so this is the report up at the top is not my report. That was what theirs, and it said that we had $57.5 million.
It's not your report, but everybody at home has it on the front page of their not asked for mailer.
Yeah.
And it matches. It says 2015, 57.5 million in total reserves. In 2016, and we had 75.9 million. So they were off by $20 million, while in the headline, residents of the Woodlands have been grossly overtaxed. Still doesn't add up. $20 million wrong on their chart on their front page. Sorry, Monique.
It's disinformation. It's intentionally being wrong.
So I also want to point out in 2022, we do have $105 million in reserves. Out of that, there's $30 million in an operating reserve, almost $40 million in our capital replacement reserve, and then an incorporation reserve balance of about $20 million in non-discretionary reserves, meaning we really can't touch those at $15.5 million. And we're going to go over that in a little bit more detail. So this is basically should have just moved to this slide. That's basically what I just said. So the operating reserve is very, very important to the township. Without it, we would not have the AA ratings that we have from our credit agencies, and the interest rate we pay on bonds would be much higher. This is considered very favorably by our credit rated agencies. They report on it in every credit report that they issue to the township. It represents about 3 months of township general fund expenses, and the balance is maintained by policy at 20 to 25% of general fund operating expenses, which is that's a very common standard. Here's a look at our operating reserve. So the blue line is the minimum, the 20% of general fund operating expenses. I should have included this, but I did not in here. If we If the voters choose to incorporate, this does not change. We still are easily within our 20 to 25% factor. Okay, then there's a capital replacement reserve. That's at $39 million. That's the largest reserve that we have. And what that reserve does is it ensures the timely replacement of assets in a 30-year capital plan. Examples include public safety vehicles. We talked about that a little while ago. That's where a lot of our funding's coming from. Fire department equipment, park and pathway, information technology projects. So again, this is important because we have $200 million of assets in there, and this is something that the board considered a high priority in terms of making sure that there was funding available to have the timely replacement of those. This reduces the reliance on debt financing of capital assets. It's more of a pay-as-you-go philosophy, and we put $4.25 million into it annually. And again, this is considered very favorably by our credit rating agencies. This is sort of unique, actually, to local jurisdictions. There's not very many that have it, and but it's looked upon very favorably. This is our capital replacement reserve. Currently at $38.9 million. It is higher than his recommended balance right now because there were a lot of projects deferred during COVID that the board, again, wanted to be very conservative. Those projects are back on track. Plus, just within the normal reserve study, we have a lot of big projects, a lot of big park renovations and other things coming up. And so I have heard that part of what is planned in the incorporation model is to use up all of these reserves in order to fund. And I just wanted to point out that that's not the case. This is a planned utilization based on our reserve study of the capital replacement reserve. Then we have non-discretionary reserves, which I'm not going to go over all of these, but these are basically either by law or some other type of thing. They're only for very specific purposes. The board does not just take money out of these reserves in order to fund for general purposes. So how was the incorporation reserve funded and how will it be used? The reserve was funded by favorable revenue and expense variances in previous budgets. If voters approve incorporation, the funds will be used for police department and public works capital expenses. And also want to point out here, we're going to look at this because there's been a lot of recommendations that reserve funds can be used to reduce the tax rate, and that is not the case, and I'm going to show you why. So how was the incorporation reserve funded? It was funded from favorable budget variances. And you can see here, starting back in 2016, because we had a buildup of favorable variances, that's when the incorporation reserve started. There was a big influx of cash in $12.6 million in 2018, and we're going to talk about where that came from. And then just recently, the board wanted to consolidate its reserves. There had been a point where there was a lot of them out there, and so collapsed the property site plan into it. So that $12.6 million that we saw in 2018, it was a buildup of reserves from prior years. And I'll get to a slide in a minute that better explains it, so let me just keep on going. But in 2017, that was the big one of $10.2 million. And the reason why is because of this. We had a huge favorable variance that year because in 2017, we had only forecasted a 1% revenue growth because of what was happening in 2016, and we ended up with 5.7. Besides that, the board and staff were being very conservative on expenses. So when you see the favorable variance that was generated from sales tax that we were not expecting, and the expense, being very careful on expenses, it generated a lot of money. And that was what first started the incorporation reserve. So what do I mean by favorable budget variances? In any type of budgeting, any local jurisdiction should, if they're using conservative budget principles, have favorable variances. It's not an intentional type of thing. You're just a budget's a budget. It's a plan, but you're not going to land on a dime on anything you budget. So there's always going to be, again, under conservative budgeting principles, you would normally expect to have a favorable variance in revenue and then a favorable variance in expense. So what can those variances be used for? According to GFOA, Government Finance Officers Association, best practices, variances are considered one-time funding sources. So you don't use those types of things to fund ongoing expenses. So what has this board used those for? And you can see them, and this is in a list of priority order of what the board has tended to use those one-time variances for: to retire debt, to fund budget initiatives, to fund other capital projects, and then in terms of funding reserves, to make sure that the operating reserve is not only at its minimum, but higher, that supplemented the capital replacement reserve, set up non-discretionary funds, and the very last priority has always been to fund the Incorporation Reserve. So it's not even really, it wasn't even a set-out thing to do. It's just at the end of the day, rather than keeping money in contingency reserves, it was assigned somewhere, and the last place, if there was money left, it got assigned to the Incorporation Reserve. That is how it has worked. So in terms, I just wanted to take this minute here in terms of retiring debt, which has always been the first priority of the board in order to do that. This, you can see here, this is an example of that. So our debt has been reduced 64% or $71 million over that period of time. And the red line there, you can see the debt per capita has steadily decreased. So all of this that we've been talking about is all with the goal of achieving what's called a structurally balanced budget. Again, this is GFOA recommended. It is something that we follow very, very closely. True structurally balanced budget is one that supports financial sustainability in multiple years into the future. That's the key to everything on staff that we do, and that's the key to all the policies that the board makes. I'm just taking different little quotes here. Year-end surpluses, which we talked about, favorable variances, are an appropriate source for funding fund balances or reserves. So that's exactly what GFOA recommends that you do with those types of money. And then in terms of using reserves to pay for ongoing expenditures or do something like reduce the tax rate, which is an ongoing revenue source, it indicates an imbalance in the budget, and then it gives that specific example if reserves are being used to fund ongoing types of operations.
And in fact, Monique, that's exactly the reason why we do a 5-year forecast.
And you're exactly right.
Yeah, that's exactly why we do it.
That's right.
Because, you want to make absolutely certain that whatever tax rate, especially with the curbs currently, imposed on us by SB 3, it would be suicidal not to do this.
That's right. You always want to make sure whatever you're deciding in the current year is sustainable. That's exactly right. Okay, so again, going down to why does this one-time funding source, such as reserves, cannot be used to lower the property tax rate as is being suggested? Well, if you use it in the first year, say you use up a $20 million reserve to fund expenses and you lower the tax rate to do that, then when you get to the second year, what are you going to do? Because now you don't have the tax revenue coming in, you've used up that reserve, and now you have an imbalance in your budget.
So to make a point here, Monique, the people who have suggested that we take the reserves and spend them to reduce the tax rate, and they've thrown out different numbers, a lot of them have run businesses, or they are running businesses, and they surely know that that's not how you run a business, that you don't pay for your operating expenses with some big amount of money that you have one time. And when I first came here and met you as a finance vice president, you told me that you and your team run this place like a business. And I was really impressed because most governments don't run like a business. And I want to applaud you for that because you've always done it above board, transparent, and always with the goal of keeping expenses down and always having that nice cushion, if you want to call it that. That's the cushion is the reserve. Right. And a rainy day fund, there are a lot of words that you can use, but you have to have something like that because you never know when there'll be a natural disaster or a COVID or financial hiccup that will require some help in order to get us through. It's a one-time event.
Right. That's exactly what it's
Well,
for.
if we had listened 2 years ago and spent that Incorporation Reserve to pay down the tax rate, let's talk about what would have happened last year. $14 million revenue shortfall.
Right,
So the only place you can go is your operational reserve.
right,
So that operational reserve then now has to be replenished.
exactly.
And because the tax rate is so restricted, you have two choices. You can either propose a fairly hefty tax increase that needs to get voted on, which is unlikely to pass, or you have to begin cutting services in order to make up that shortfall. I'm going to second Dr. Shelley's comments. These reserves have been out in the open. Our budget process has been absolutely transparent the entire time I've been on this board. In business, when you have an expense that you expect, and every single election cycle for the last 5 years has been a discussion about incorporation. And everybody that's sitting here has said pretty much that, that at some point that, we are committed to giving the residents an opportunity to vote on incorporation. It would be, really imprudent, of us not to make, to strategically plan for known expenses. It's absolutely mind-boggling to me to hear people say, well, they just hid that $20 million and all of a sudden it popped up. Really? There hasn't been anything hidden. I'm digressing, but I'm going to give you a little anecdotal thing that happened to me a couple of years ago. I was doing an interview and I came out and there was a gentleman there that was running against our congressman. And he was a former finance manager for the city of Houston. And he stopped me and he said, I just want to tell you how impressed I am about, the way you guys do your budget. Everything is right there. It's out in the open. It's amazing. And I looked at him and said, do you know why? And he goes, no. And he said, because we have nothing to hide. I'm not trying to hide anything from anybody.
Right. You're right. It's been called the Incorporation Reserve since 2016. It's never been called anything else. That's exactly what it's been.
And I have one other question about the reserves. This reserve system that the township uses, it predates most of the people who serve on this board currently, right?
Right.
All of us.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, right?
That is correct.
So it's not some scheme that this board decided to put together over the last few years.
No, it's been in place,
I just
even in
wanted
the
to make
community
sure.
association days it was in place.
I went back and watched some video because, I thought I was being mischaracterized as the Jedi mind trick that convinced this board and our staff on how to hoard cash and hide cash from the public and overtax people and making them blissfully unaware when 90% of them say they feel our services are at a great value in our last residential survey. The expansion of the reserving activity started in 2012, led by Director Bass, where he started creating new random, road reserves and, a reserve here and a reserve there, and then all these ended up. So a lot of the money that's in our reserves was accumulated, and I just want to address one thing. I may be chairman of the board, but I get one vote. I don't control any of these folks. Everybody here is independent. We have a pastor, a medical doctor, an entrepreneur, a facilities manager of a Fortune 500 company, a PhD, and an entrepreneur who teaches entrepreneurship at Sam Houston State. We are not incompetent people.
So,
And-
but we are really subject to the Jedi mind trick. So,
So when you see things aspire, look, I can't take blame or credit for anything. And as we talk through things, we always give credit to our staff because this is a professional managed organization. This isn't a strong board managed, we have a professional city manager who's our general manager now, who runs this operation. We have a fire chief who runs the fire department. We have a parks director who runs parks. We're not running any of this stuff. We set policy and guidelines, and our staff is largely responsible for why we got a credit upgrade, right? And I would go look at the credit ratings of the people who are actually judging our work. The corporations and the counties and the city consultants, go look at all their bond ratings. None of them are AA+. So I don't know why I would take advice or suggestions from these folks who couldn't take the time to come to any of the 50 meetings we held over the last 3 years, or when they found something grossly inaccurate that was going to threaten the quality of life of our community, couldn't pick up the phone to call us and say, whoa, before you do this, let us make sure you know of all these holes in your budgets and all these holes in your proposals. Don't do this because it's reckless. Not a single call. No, we got resolutions from the chamber saying, don't put it on the ballot, but with no context of saying they had all these studies commissioned saying we were grossly inaccurate. It was, no, we'd rather wait. So, think about the source and the amount of funding that's going to be put out there to put out this information that we all know is factually inaccurate. And that's, Monique, I appreciate you. They're really disparaging our staff's work. And it's wrong. She's been here 29 years. When they go out and they say, we're number one, but they want to take all the credit for being number one. Understand, we have a great community, and it was master planned by George Mitchell, and it's not exactly the same as he did it the first 20-plus years as the last 20-plus years. And we owe a lot to all that growth over that period of time. But as things get developed, parks, they get handed off to the township, the old HOAs. And it's the township that does the repairs, and it's the township that does the replacement, and it's the township that bought Rob Fleming Rec Center and created a recreational facility in Creekside Park. It wasn't Howard Hughes or Montgomery County Precinct 3 Commissioner Novak. If you listen to him, you think he actually runs the entire, Woodlands. He does nothing in Creekside Park, and he does nothing in Precinct 2, and he does nothing in Precinct 4. It's interesting to hear the dialogue that's out there. This staff, the almost 500-plus employees that run this township, and the people who live here, and largely our school districts, are what got us to that #1 rating. And yes, it's a beautifully planned community. We all live, work, play, and pray here. But don't disparage our professional staff. This is their work product. They work directly with the consultants. And if anybody should apologize, it should be them.
One thing I'd say is that first, I feel insulted on behalf of this board, but then when I think about it more, I feel insulted on behalf of you and John and Karen and Chris and the other 497 employees that have worked their tails off every day to help make sure that this community is what it is and it's what the residents deserve. So I apologize to you on behalf of all of these people who really have no clue what they're talking about, and I'm sorry that you've had to go through this.
Thank you. Appreciate
Well,
it.
let's be honest, Director Milner, they're called hired guns, and they are just trained at everybody in the Woodlands who might have a difference of opinion. Some people would call them cancel culture people, but it's just a shame that it has to come to that. But I think everybody knows the work quality you have, Ms. Sharp, is A++.
And I think one of the other things that really confuses me is some of the people who, in some ways, are impugning the character of you, your department, the township, are the same people who have laid accolades and praised you and John and Karen and the township staff in previous years, either when they held leadership positions in this community or were business leaders in this community. And so all of a sudden now, because there's a disagreement on the approach to governance in this community, they now decide that everything they said in the past is not really accurate. Now what they're saying today is the most accurate. And to me, that's as much insulting to you and the township staff as anything else.
Thank you. I think I'm down to just a couple of slides.
Okay.
Can't wait.
I just passed over that. This is the last one on things that, again, that I've been questioned about, and then we're going to just get to a summary. One of the questions out there is, or statements out there is the township's reserves could be lowered to $56 million, and those funds could be used to lower the tax rates if the voters choose not to incorporate. So the first one I'm going to talk about is to use reserve funds in order to lower the tax rate. We've already talked about that. That is not sustainable. It's not recommended by GFOA. It's actually not in your policy. By your own policies, that would not be allowed. The second question is if we lowered, I'm not exactly sure where the $56 million came from, but that's the statement that was out there. Even if we used up all of the incorporation reserve, that was the reserve that was lowered, we would still need to find another 28 million. The only way that you do that is to go into your operating reserve or your capital replacement reserve, which would negatively impact the credit rating, require capital assets to be financed, and raise the debt service component of the tax rate. So, in summary, again, just talking, when we talked about all of these things and the information that's out there regarding the inadequacies of the incorporation model, or the not being accurate, that we haven't accounted for things correctly. This is just sort of a summary. So first of all, looking at the what was titled a critique of the Novak Consulting Group's law enforcement report. We talked about all this before, but per the current contracted law enforcement personnel, you can see there the funding per their report was $51.8 million. Actually, what's in the incorporation model, $56.0 million. So we have actually are overfunded from what they said by $4.2 million, although what they reported in their report is that we were $7.2 million in the hole. So there's a big disparity there. In terms of adding the direct law enforcement staff, again, we're actually about $65,000 overfunded from what they have in their report. But the report says that we're anywhere between $4.8 million and $7.3 million short. In terms of the law enforcement vehicles, there is a difference in cost. I've already talked about that. I'm putting it as zero because we used the cost that was provided to us 2 months ago by the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office for vehicles. But they say that we're $6.1 million. The report says that we're $6.1 million short. We are not. We are fully funded on all 135 vehicles.
Oh, and Monique, I think that also fair to point out that we're not talking about, buying Dodges, we're buying Tahoes, which are much more expensive than the Dodge patrol cars that, the bulk of the sheriff's, fleet.
You're right. By the time you get out into the 5-year plan, we're at $75,000 a vehicle, and that includes equipment. But to your point, these are not cheap vehicles. In terms of the RCREF Consulting Services report, and they said that our law enforcement operations was underfunded by $4.7 million, and the law enforcement capital was underfunded by $3 million. The incorporation model includes all costs for the hybrid model that was voted on by the board. In terms of the asphalt street rehabilitation, as a reminder, they said that their report says that the incorporation model is $2.5 million short. Not only is it not short by that amount, but it actually continues funding of $1.25 million annually for forever.
Into perpetuity.
Yeah, I can't say that word. I was trying to avoid it. Thank you. And then in the Incorporation Reserve, the report said that it was underfunded by $10.7 million. In fact, there's a $1.5 million remaining in it, and the reserve is fully funded. And then we just talked about this. There's a disparity between the balances in our reserve balances. So their report is claiming that we have accumulated $49.7 million over the past 5 years, and in fact, that is $29.4 million. And a lot of that was in the operating reserve and the capital replacement reserve.
And again, just to clarify, that cannot be used to lower the tax rate.
No, it cannot, not by policy and not by best practice.
And to be clear, the things that we've used it for, when we start talking about quality of life, when I first got elected, all of our sports fields were grass. We had a positive variance. We put in AstroTurf. Now we went from half of our sports events being canceled due to rainouts or muddy conditions. Now we're 98% up. We added a sports field complex, Moresco Park, and built that in the last decade. Rob Fleming Rec Center, Texas Tree Ventures. We're looking at potentially having to rebuild a fire station that's on some kind of unstable ground. We also have to look out 5 years because we pick up expenses that you can't see today that we know are coming tomorrow. In 2023, we absorb the Woodlands Waterway and Lake Woodlands. That's not a current expense. that we have today. So even if you look at our budget this year, we had a small, like $600,000-700,000 we could have spent,
Right.
right? Well, we have to be forward-looking to say, well, in 2023, we know we pick up all this extra stuff, so we can't just let all the money go,
Right, which is included in the 5-year plan.
which is
to your
included in our
point.
5-year
Right.
plans. And I've been through 10 budgets, 10 tax rates. I'm being critiqued on the front page here for the 1 year that we had a stiff argument over the tax rate. That was the only budget passed in my entire time being here that had a negative forward projection. The only unbalanced budget ever passed is the one they're critiquing on their page.
That's correct.
And
Chairman, elaborate a little bit on that. People may not remember that, but I think it's worth expounding.
well, so we had a negative out-year budget in 2019 in our own projections,
Right.
and the board had a lot of arguing over it, and they're talking about how many times we voted. We ended up voting on the effective tax rate, but it actually put us in a negative out-year budget for the first time in the 10 budgets I've done. It's the only budget we passed with a known negative outlook.
I remember sitting in the audience when that was going on. I wasn't up here, and I remember you, Monique, showing the projections negative and how you were very, very much in the cautionary mode. Be very, very cautious about this. You were telling the people who sit here, be very cautious because this is not headed in the right direction, and that's what the chairman tried to do. And unfortunately, circumstances,
It changed, yes,
changed.
but yes.
Well, things that occurred after the fact, after the budget was adopted, turned positive. Internet sales tax,
Yeah.
right? That wasn't in our budget. It wasn't
that's been
even
huge.
wasn't even known it was going to come. Back taxes from Occidental, a change in our community services agreement that brought in $600,000 of new revenue that wasn't in our budget. So the hole didn't get plugged because we were lucky. We had to go do things differently in order to plug that hole. And if you go back to the original incorporation study, where it was saying the tax rate would need to be higher, half of the needed tax rate was to actually fill the 2019 negative budget. Wasn't incorporation related. It was due to us passing a budget for, the only budget we passed with a negative outlook was actually in the original incorporation model. And so, I love being critiqued, but they leave out context. And, it's okay, I'm a big kid, I can handle it. But I think the public deserves to know our board wants to have balanced budgets, 5-year plans, 30-year capital plans, and make sure that anything we propose has long-term viability and stable, not risky as they're claiming. This is as solid and stable of a plan as you can have.
That concludes my presentation.
Would this be a good time, Monique, for the President Jones to talk a little bit about what Ms. Casio asked regarding supplemental revenues that could be coming in for major capital projects? Would that be a good time, Chairman?
Yes. We would not want to have Ms. Cosio here for this long without answering her question.
That's right.
Well, again, just like with the HGAC public safety grant revenues that currently the township is not eligible for, there would be additional funding sources available to general law and home rule cities that currently the township is not eligible for. The City of Conroe, and this is the report, I'll just be very succinct, the City of Conroe is building a convention center and a 250-room Hyatt Regency hotel, in part funded by state sales tax and state hotel tax. That's not the local tax. It's the 6.25% state sales tax and the 6% state hotel occupancy tax. So 12.25% of tax revenue that would normally go to the state is going to stay in the City of Conroe to help fund a convention center and a convention center hotel, which will compete with the Woodlands Waterway Marriott Hotel and Convention Center. And I have spoken with Fred Dominic, the general manager of that property, and he's conferred to me that yes, that will start eating into their market share. If you recall the slide that showed a property taxes only fund 36% of our budget and 64% comes from sales and hotel tax. Well, expect those numbers, right? If we continue to have competition in other areas, expect those numbers to be a little bit more volatile. Now, if we were a home rule city that same Chapter 351 of the Texas Tax Code, that same application applied to our convention center expansion project, which has been on this board's to-do list for many, many years, would generate $25 to $26 million in state tax revenue filtered back into the Woodlands Township and Visit the Woodlands to help expand our convention center. So Conroe's getting $15 million out of that law. We're getting zero because of our current status. So I think that kind of covers, and that's just one of many other state laws and economic development tools that we don't have access to currently.
All right, I will apologize for the lengthiness of the presentation, but we wanted to be thorough. I know the chamber likes to have invited me to a session and gave me 15 minutes to explain incorporation to you. Hardly adequate.
I have one more thing, I'm sorry.
Sure.
I think one major misrepresentation out there that's being made by the people who publish that newspaper and a couple of other PACs is that it's the intent of this board to create a highly paid public official on the city council. So what I would like, maybe if you could discuss for us or Jeff, how the process works from the transition from a township board to the temporary council to the election for the first council, and how the transition works from becoming a township board to eventually putting together a home rule charter committee to put in the charter how the city council would actually function, operate, and whether or not they would be paid.
I'll do that as quickly as I can.
Thank you.
And should the ballot initiative pass in November, the next day we would be the City of the Woodlands. And the then board becomes the interim council. The interim council does have authority to act on behalf of the general law city. One of the things we will be required to do is call for a election of a city council and mayor, which will actually shrink the number of us up here. There'll be a mayor and 5 councilmen. We will not be getting paid the day after a referendum passes. And we don't get, the new group coming in that would be the first officially elected city council would not be paid either. The home rule charter is a process where residents write, Constitution Week, it's great. The residents will write the constitution of this community called a home rule charter. And it'll get voted upon by our residents, and it has to be approved by them. And that sets limitations like term limits, pay or no pay, referendums to recall elected officials, whether or not you can do ordinances without voter approval. The home rule charter lays out the authority that the residents grant to their government and the restrictions they impose on them. And that has to be voter approved. So it's the most local form of governance because residents write the rules. And hopefully that was a general summary?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Monique, you're fantastic. We really appreciate everything you do for this community, not just for the past 29 years, for hopefully the next 29.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right.
We won't put that in the home rule charter, okay?
So we had one more presentation on this agenda item. I don't know if Todd, was it loaded? Renee, I'm going to do this super quick because it's something that wasn't picked up in Monique's summary that I wanted to address. Because I actually did read the 95-page report to make sure that we're not misrepresenting things. So law enforcement, I got to tell you, I'm disappointed that several folks have decided to opine without calling and checking with us to make sure what they were opining on was accurate. But let's talk about public safety and incorporation. It was crucial for us as a board to make sure we had a multi-year transition agreement to make sure we had public safety addressed on the other side of a positive vote. So we have a 5-year transition agreement. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. This was passed less than 12 months ago. Motioned by Commissioner Novak, seconded by Commissioner Metz, and passed for supplemental law enforcement. And then on the same date, the interlocal agreement for transition of law enforcement in the event we become a municipality. It was approved by this board 7-0. This is the foundation of a multi-year transition in ensuring we have public safety for our community. So when I hear and I see we're threatening quality of life and we're going to have reduced public safety, it's offensive, especially when Commissioner Novak's one out there saying it, and he approved and made the motion for the agreement less than 12 months ago. Let's go ahead to the next slide. The 95-page consultant said we missed cost, we're not, accurately tracking everything. This is in our contract with the county. Basically outlines everything we pay for, which includes step pay, overtime, FICA, retirement benefits, medical, an administrative fee, and anything else they decide as additional in their budget process is passed through to the township. Next slide. This deals with the transition agreement, all right? The direct personnel, the 19 folks that they're paying versus the 92 people we currently fund. County is going to pay for 100% of the personal costs in year one by contract. So when someone's out there saying the face of public safety is going to change the day after incorporation, they're either grossly misinformed or forgetting the agreements that they signed and voted for. The face of law enforcement doesn't change the day after incorporation. It remains the same. Same, Sheriff Henderson, same patrol deputies, same level of service that we have in force today. The city will pick up additional costs in years 2 and on out, but there's no threat to our public safety through this process. Next slide. This is a chart showing how the reduction of force could occur as we onboard city police department. So year 1, maximum reduction 0%, which means there'll be 0 change in levels of service to this community. Year 2, you can draw down 18 personnel into the City of the Woodlands Police Department. So this is a scheduled, thoughtful, multi-year transition in order to make sure that we have what we need to ensure we have public safety for this community. It is a 5-year contract, incontrovertible, already approved and signed by both government entities. All right, I don't look, now, yes. We're gonna have to build a jail. Anybody hear that? No, we're not. Jail services are provided by the county to all entities countywide at no cost. It's part of our county tax. We didn't include, dispatch and detectives and major crimes and all these other things. This is our actual contract that says these are all the services the county is going to provide to our community post-incorporation at the same cost if they cost anything to other municipalities in the county. All of these services today are currently a 0 cost to all the other municipalities in the county. So we don't have deficiencies in our plan. We have a 5-year transition agreement. We have all these services in our contracts, and I feel very confident in what's been presented to the public. It's factual and it's contractual. I think that was the last one. All right. We will get off of this high horse and move on. Anybody have any questions or anything else about incorporation? Okay, I think we're all fatigued. We will take a motion in a second to accept the updated reports. I will make one comment. Because
Somebody
because
just resuscitated that dead horse.
well, I want to be fair to all parties. They didn't talk to our staff or our consultants. So they relied upon aged data, right? And we moved all that data from the 2 years ago into our base budget. So they probably didn't have a way to find the accurate information, the current information, without a conversation with us. So we can invite them to have that conversation and be open to their feedback. But they were looking at the wrong information, all right, to be fair. Okay. That's not normal for me to be fair, but that's what it is. All right. A motion and a second to approve the updated
So
reports.
moved.
Second.
Would anybody like a break? We're going to take a quick break. SGRA guys, we're going to pick you guys up on the other side, and we are going to quickly recess.
Do we vote?
All right, we are reconvening from a recess. I failed to finish agenda item 9. I did ask for a motion in a second. I will now take a motion in a second to accept the reports from agenda item 9.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that carries. Thank you for the